Welcome again, Hive Scum, to this episode, and we're going to be talking about the dark and oppressive world of Necromunda. We're going to continue our exploration of those Necromunda gangs by talking about a personal favorite, and one that I just recently painted for a friend, the gangs of House Orlock. The rough and tumble house that is bigger than you know. Also known as the House of Iron, because they have an iron grip on the mining and ore industries that permeate Necromunda. Massive mining operations scatter the wastes, pouring these raw materials into the Underhive, ready to be worked, smelted, and sent to the manufactorums across all these hive cities on Necromunda. Many weapons across the Imperium begin their lives with the bleeding hands of a House Orlock miner pulling its raw material from the earth. And remember that all these great houses contribute to the greater industry of the planet, right? That's why they're kind of allowed to exist. All of them bring something to this very complex ecosystem that exists in a hive city. All of them having to work and struggle together to make manufacturing quotas, but also assert power and dominance over one another. And fitting well into this sort of structure is the House Orlock. Part street gang, part slavery mining operation, I guess you could say, with all the lives of the hive citizens is pretty bad, as we've explored. Those serfs that labor for House Orlock have it particularly brutal. Spending their lives deep in the mines, right? Working to the bone, constantly prodded and pressed like cattle to produce more and cost less. This is one of the best representations of how cheap life is viewed in Necromunda. For most people, there is a death sentence, right? I mean, if you are sent to these mines, you are functionally a dead man walking. You got black lung, sleep deprivation, tunnel collapses. It's a very dangerous life. But for some, they can break out of this life if they have the grit and the fight. If they choose a life of violence, they demonstrate their violent tendencies to people who are watching. They are plucked out of their mining existence, and this is how the actual gangs that we can interact with are made. These are toughened and hardened men and women made strong through a lifetime of basic slavery in a mine shaft, filled with rage about their lot in life, and now are turned loose to enforce the will of the house. This system of being subjugated, and then the most aggressive are turned into warriors and enforcers, was actually born out of an uprising. This took place a millennia ago, a long time ago. But at that point, the structure of the gang was fairly similar. The big difference was that the gangers, the guards, the mining managers, were hired rather than being from the working class. The muscle of this faction at this time became extremely lazy and cruel, and so a riot ensued where thousands of workers rose up to fight Orlock leadership. And this was a problem for a myriad of reasons. The power of any given house is dependent on its ability to meet the needs of the hive. This also keeps the authorities turning a blind eye to the house's business. In addition, leadership of the hive and Necromunda as a whole does depend on these larger gangs to self-regulate, to enforce justice, keep peace, etc. All of that falls apart when a riot of this magnitude goes down. Investigators are doing the math on ore production, and things are not looking good. Furthermore, this idea of a riot, not acceptable. Not acceptable in the Imperium whatsoever. That kind of thinking is like a virus in these kind of closed environments where conditions are so bad. And at this point, the leaders of the House Orlock are desperate, but they are still very cunning. How do we restore order and make sure this doesn't happen again, right? Things need to change, our approach needs to change. And this is where that happens, and this is how they become the house that we know today, the one I talked about earlier. The house rulers use a tool that is often overlooked but is extremely powerful in terms of world history, and that is propaganda. Across every bar, lounge, hab sector, watering hole, market under Orlock influence, rumors began to stir regarding all the other gangs. Right? Rumors like those Escher girls are going to come and kill all the men and render them impotent, or the bloodthirsty Goliaths are going to eat us because they're cannibals. Those zealots of Khador will flay us alive because they don't think we love the Emperor. That kind of stuff. Pitting, kind of stirring up this artificial, it's not artificial, it exists, but stoking the fires of hating everyone who isn't part of the Orlock, system. fear and hatred turned outwards. No longer rioting against the Orlock leadership specifically, they now kind of directed all that focus at the other gangs. And what do groups of people do when they're faced with enemies on all sides? Well, they band together for survival. The old guard of Orlock enforcement was pulled back, and the rioting workers naturally self-regulated. So some would stand and say, we can't let these other gangs, push us around. We need to fight back, right? And folks would rally around that person who said that. Those people were taken to be part of the new House Orlock gangs, where they could be armed and bully others into acting for the bigger cause. Because that's really the genius here, right? Brute force wasn't getting results, so you let the situation breed naturally. You create fear, fear begets these heroes to oppose it, and when they're armed and told, get everyone else in line so that we can survive. And thus a new wave of powerful enforcers, gangers, and leaders circulated in. But these ones were plucked from the miners and the mines themselves. They have this natural tenacity and fight, but they understand that what needs to be done in order for us to survive is we have to keep the mines going. We have to do all this. We have to fight the other gangs. You take these workers and you get them to, come up with these ideas thinking it's their own ideas, but you get them to meet mining quotas. And so the other gangs can't offer to do it better. Protect those mines with armed and tough guards. This whole series of events, right? The revolution and the fighting and the change in how they kind of operate became known as the Crucible Schism. It's almost like a small, micro version of nationalism. Hyper-nationalism, I should say. That the gangers of Orlock believe that their very way of life and the ability to live life how they see fit is at a constant threat. And so, in a sense, they became the guards of their own prison to keep things going. And I use the word nationalism specifically because there is an aspect of being from an Orlock gang that these people have built into their identity. Right? Their structure is way more formal and tight than other gangs. It's structured like a large mining business or a prison or a law enforcement agency. They have a lot more order than the ragtag nature of many other gangs. And those that are raised within this system are fiercely loyal to it. So when a serf looks at a ganger, right, one of the people in the mine looks at someone who was elevated from working in the mines, they don't see necessarily a tyrant. It's one of them. It's one of the same people. They are jealous and scared in equal measure, but the guards and the wardens of their lives at this point are something that you can aspire to. And it's this weird play on hope and this illusion that you can better your status as a mine worker. If you're a mine worker and you're brutal enough, you can elevate your world to being a ganger. All of that is to say, this is how we get the really cool gangers that you and I, can actually play with. And it's a part of the game, right, that we get to play with, and that's really what it brings me to. That being said, these are miners, right? They don't have the intense chemical knowledge of House Escher or the muscle steroid enhancements of Goliaths. These are just dudes. You want a sub-faction that really represents the average Joe? You pretty much get two flavors, right? You have hardworking guys, right? The average working class hero, boom, House Orlock, or the religious, extremists, which we would call Khador. Both of them are just normal people. If you and I were going to go into this fantasy world and relate to any of these dirt folk, as I call all the people in all these gangs, it's probably the House Orlock guys. And so they don't have all these special intense things. What do they lean on? What's their thing, right? Their thing is reliable weapons. Not super high tech or exotic, but shotguns, autoguns, pistols, and more. Dependable firearms are the staple of an Orlock gang, as well as their sense of unity. A lot of these other gangs are very cutthroat internally, right? Constantly competing and backstabbing each other. We talked about that a bit in my Escher video. And one of the defining aspects of the Orlocks is that they really, truly are largely on the same team. They walk confidently down streets, confident, that their boys behind them have their back. And in all the chaos and craziness of the Hive, that's a very unique feature. It doesn't mean that these individual gangs who do act independently don't clash or anything like that. Absolutely they do. But it's not the same level as backstabbing and dirty tactics that you'll see in many, many other gangs. And this kind of ethics, if you will, is not an unspoken thing. They have an actual code called the Iron Brotherhood Creed, which just simply says, my gang before my house before the rest. Which is just kind of puts their world in priority. Their gang is always first, so that's why you could have an explanation as to why 2 Orlock gangs would fight. But ultimately, if anything interrupts and it's about, a different faction, my house before the rest. I'll team up with some Orlock gang that I don't like, and we'll settle our thing afterwards, but let's go kick these Escher in the face first. This deep, like us versus them mentality that was stoked by all this propaganda binds the fighters of House Orlock together, and a unity of purpose can make for a formidable foe. And this unity does extend down to the working class, right? Where, you might have beggars or mine workers. They'll tip off the Orlock gangs to other gang activity in the area or lead them to a big score. And the rewards and loot gained from Orlock conquests do very, purposefully trickle down to those folks who help them out. That's like a perverted version of Robin Hood, if you will. And the gangers here become local heroes for it. And while every individual gang of House Orlock, over which there are, thousands, has its own little, idiosyncrasies, all of them collectively form a force to be reckoned with within any hive. And so let's back up here. Why is it cool? Why is House Orlock really cool? Well, this is, like I said before, the working class hero, right? The average Joe pitted against some of these crazy out there, 80s cocaine bender themed, other gangs. They're just normal dudes with rocking really basic weapons. Like I said, nothing exotic. These are shotguns, these are pistols, that kind of stuff. I think one of them has a power fist, and that's really about it. This kind of leans into another reason. This is just a personal reason why I like them. Very Mad Max-like, with all the weapons and the kind of gritty survivalist gear they kind of wear. I think it looks very Mad Max. I love it. It's one of my favorite aesthetics in the game. And all the basic weaponry really kind of adds to that theme and that flavor. Digging into their actual lore, though, of which more is going to be coming with all these expansion books that GW has planned, one thing I can say is that the use of propaganda as a tool is the defining feature here, and I think that is incredibly interesting because a lot of these other gangs, as I've read ahead, they all have some kind of thing that brings some level of cohesion, whether it's just mutual benefit or that kind of stuff. But we don't really see a lot in 40k. Aside from Astra Militarum, the use of propaganda. And it is such a critically important thing in real, our world, modern warfare, right? It has been ever since World War I. And where we had started to have true international broadcasts of information and that kind of stuff in much more real time. And so I think having a faction that's like, this is their thing, or at least it's what galvanized them at one point to becoming unique, I think is a really cool, thing to touch on. I'm glad every faction doesn't have it. I want it to be a special thing, and I'm glad they have it here. I just finished painting my buddy Ben's Orlock gang, and so we're hoping to start getting into Necromunda here pretty quickly with my Escher and his Orlocks. Very excited about it. If you are an Orlock ganger, let me know in the comments down below, as well as what you'd like to learn about next. I have the next gang already picked out, but I'm open to suggestions to anything after that. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. Hope you all have a wonderful week, and happy wargaming.